Hey, Charlie Murphy here. Going to do a little bit of database review and pool exploration. Got Alan here, better known as bababaBINK, playing in the Pokerstars Michigan pool. Going to take a look at some of his sample over the past couple of years using the MDA wizard to take a look at how he's playing and how the players in his pool are playing. Get logged in right here, taking a look at the most current version of MDA Wiz. Got a couple of different GTO hand histories in there. Do you want to start looking at yours, or you want to start looking at the player pool?
We can let the people know if I'm a wild man or if I'm a tight knit. That's
Okay.
fine.
Okay, we'll go there. We'll take a look at you first. Start looking at the general pre-flop.
See where we can potentially, tighten things up a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
or at least it depends on what's incentivized by what the pool is
Yeah,
doing.
exactly. Like I looked at a little bit of the stuff earlier, and I saw where you're deviating, but probably for a good reason. So first thing first, we're looking at just a general overview of stats. First thing I see here in the main tab, you're definitely playing a good bit looser than a GTO bot would. Like you look your VPIP in 29 versus 22. More aggression, raising pre-flop 24-25% versus about a 19% from a GTO bot. More calling from the big blind, more calling in position, little bit more three betting by about a percent or two, and squeezing about on point with what the bots are doing. So I already see you're playing a little bit looser and more aggressive than the GTO bots would be. Now that's not inherently a mistake. I'm assuming, but I'm going to ask. This is a conscious decision. You're intentionally playing looser than GTO from your raise first in and three betting spots in some way to take advantage of perceived weaknesses in the player pool.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I've been around since the full tilt days, and
Okay.
I've
No
always
kidding.
loved like Jay Rosencrantz, if you remember that name, Ernie Raid. I've always loved his style of play,
I
and just
I haven't heard those names in God knows how long, but I was also a pre Black Friday player, so it's
yeah.
was not expected to hear those names today, or not even thinking about them. But I do remember, yeah, and the loose aggressive style was always sexier. The vanilla grinders could make their money, but the guys playing loose and aggressive, they got all the chicks. So I
It's just I love that aspect of the game. It takes more than just like sitting at the computer and just again like playing. Like it's almost like ABC now. Like you
yeah.
can just copy paste. There's so much more to the game, and I believe like back then
Mm-hmm.
guys saw that there was so much more to the game.
Yeah.
Also like the side that like the GTO side they didn't know, they kind of had to teach themselves. So that's been
Mm-hmm.
my approach for a long time. It's been like my aspiration, my aim is to try and play a little bit differently than a robot,
Yeah.
and it seems to be working out so far.
First of all, it's more fun. It's more engaging.
For
I
sure.
I respect that. And the other thing, it's incentivized just by playing against weaker players. I mean, I think I've got some older videos out on this where I kind of took a look at this theory and experiment with the play where the basic theory is that these hands that are roughly break even or right around zero EV or mixed frequencies pre-flop, they're neutral. A solver in a game versus other solvers will sort of be indifferent to them. Well, they literally are indifferent. They're zero EV hands because they're playing against another perfect opponent that knows their strategy. You're playing against guys that leak, recreational players or regs that aren't nearly as good as solvers or might not even be all that good. Period. If solver versus solver can make a hand break even, you versus the guy you're playing against in a good game, your pool seemed reasonably fishy from when I looked at the balance of regs to fish and what you sent over. You're going to be able to take those hands and do better than solver does against solver because the difference between you, a good reg, and solver is not nearly as big as the difference between the solver opponent and the fish. So just that to me is kind of the bare minimum of hands you should be playing in most cases, and there's room to expand your range, and that's what we're seeing you do, and I agree with it philosophically, and your results seem pretty damn good too. So obviously overall it's working. Looking in the lower left hand panel, it looks like even your RFIs, even from earlier spots, are already being a bit looser. RFI 18 versus 21% under the gun. Couple ticks higher at every formation, getting more so aggressive as you get later on, which I think is reasonable. Some higher stakes guys, I've looked at some of their frequencies a little bit, and these are guys playing like 5K NL on ACR, like much tougher game than Stars MI, obviously. Like 200 or 500 no limit. Even guys that were expanding their ranges in earlier spots, they might be sticking more close to GTO frequencies earlier and starting to deviate. The later position you get, the looser the formation you get. So I'm seeing some version of that right here too. You're still looser than solver from all positions with your RFIs, but you're celebrating it more so the later on you go. I mean, you're an extra 6-7% blind versus blind, plus with a few open limps as well on top of that, where you're only a couple percent larger under the gun. So you're deviating from GTO, but I already don't think that's an issue. I think that's probably a good way to pick up extra winnings.
Yeah, I have reasons for that.
Yeah, it sounds like you do, and they're exactly what I expected them to be. So I don't, that's a deviation, but not a problem as far as I'm concerned. Taking a look at some of the post flop aggression stats next up here in the middle, the top middle panel. First three stats are 1-1 saw flop, which is a stat we're all familiar with, and then slight variations of that. 1-1 saw turn and 1-1 saw river, which I decided to weave into this as well. You are not winning quite as much as the bots when you see the flop, but it's certainly not a big issue. Most players, I think, struggle. I mean, a few players are more hyper aggro and have higher 1-1 saw flop than bots do, but most players tend to struggle to get this stat up quite as high. You're only off by about 1% or 2, and it also looks like you're really, when you're getting in these pots, you're doing well on later streets where you're winning just as much as the bots do when you get to the turn, even more so on the river. I won't be surprised if we see maybe some slight overfolds on the flop that lead to you not overfolding and probably even over defending some later streets, which again often the pool incentivize that kind of thing. So some of my better samples, I had really low fold to river stats, and a lot of it was involved among just blindly clicking the call button in spots where the player pool was likely to be bluffy. It was also a case of cleaning up the range a street or two earlier, so I get to the river knowing I'm not folding. I've already dumped the weak hands a street or two early. It looks like you're doing that maybe on the flop and then definitely fighting for pots on the turn in the river, which all this seems philosophically reasonable to me. Am I inferring things in your mindset or your strategy, or am I seeing things you don't think are necessarily there?
No, it's all pretty solid. I expect my 1-1 saw flop to be slightly higher. I think just from what I had in tracker, but I thought it would be slightly higher.
Yeah,
and like the 52 range, but
and some of these stats, these stats are using the aggression frequency is going to vary from your poker tracker because this is done with a different calculation. This is matching the same calculation used in hand to note.
Okay.
So like your aggression frequency stats in poker, you're going to be like, why is this number so low? Because it's calculated differently. I've seen that talked about in different discords a lot lately. The 1-1 saw flop stat might have a slightly different calculation as well. The important thing to remember here is that even if these stats are, defined slightly differently than you may be used to, they're defined the same way for both of these profiles. So we are comparing apples to apples here.
Yeah, got it.
And then aggression frequency, like I think this is up over 50% in Poker Tracker's calculation, whereas the hand to note style calculation, has bots at 37% and you're at 36%. So you're damn near as aggressive as the bots are, which isn't always easy to do. Looks like you're slightly less aggressive on the flop, slightly more aggressive on the turn, which usually I see it the other way, where the turn is one spot where people tend to polarize more and maybe have less bets. So you're doing a slightly different style here. You're not deviating wildly. It looks like you're only a percentage or 2 off from what the bots are doing in these other streets. So either way, I wouldn't call that a big swing either way, and there's certainly reasons why you can do it. Nothing jumps out here as a leak to me is the most important thing we're talking about. As far as getting to showdown, you're at 28, the bots are 34. The bots seem to be really high about getting to showdown. They're sticky post flop. You're deviating from the bots, but not in the way that I find uncommon. Your 1 at showdown is extremely similar, off by winning slightly less than 1%, or a percent difference. You're at 52.5 for the bots and 51.4 for you. And then these other two stats over here in the upper right hand panel, this is your 1 at showdown when you've either bet the river or raised the river. I like that as a heuristic for range strength, especially when you're looking at databases that don't have exposed hole cards. Because if I'm looking at bot hand histories that I have bot hand histories for, if I'm looking at my own or a student's database, I can look at your range composition. I've got your whole hole cards. I know, I can look at all that exactly. But if I'm looking at a player pool that doesn't have exposed hole cards, I can't necessarily tell what their range composition is. I can measure frequencies, but you have not all hands get the showdown. Some sites don't even let you see muck to losers and the hand history. So like ACR's data is very, very not useful for range strength because you don't really get it in any meaningful way. But how often players win at showdown in certain lines, basic ones here, when you bet the river or range the river, is a good heuristic for how strong those ranges are in that particular line. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. And now here, the bots are winning at showdown 60% when they bet. You're winning 54. That's a big deviation, but I'm guessing that's because you probably hammer bluffs on the river more than the theory bot would, correct? Just because overfolds are so prevalent in so much of the game tree.
Yeah, and it's likely that in a combination with potentially going too thin.
Mm-hmm.
Is what I would imagine.
I think. Let me make sure I'm thinking through this correctly. If you go thinner and get called. Like if you're betting thinner than theory and still getting called, but like they're good value bets in your game because you're winning. Your WSD when you bet would actually go up because that's a hand that you're winning. I think it's probably more a combination of bluffing more hands than a solver would and picking up more folds. If the player pool doesn't call quite enough against river bets, your thin value bets don't see showdown. You don't get credit for winning with them right there, kind of thing. So I think betting thinner is good because it helps kind of justify all the bluffing that you're doing, which I assume you're doing if you've got any kind of data or mass data, influence in your game. But I think that's what we'd be seeing there.
Okay.
Taking a look at the rest of the pre-flop stats. You're folding the three bets a little bit less than the bots. As long as you're playing those well, that's good. In position, slightly less. Out of position, you're folding less to a larger extent. Part of that could be sizing oriented. We'll look at that a bit closer in a minute. You're four betting a little bit less than the bots, but not bad. You're folding to five bets a good bit more than the bots, which is probably okay because the pool is probably not five bet jamming those like ace five suited hands nearly often enough. And then you're folding to squeeze a little bit more than the bots are, and there may also be a bit of a trick in that because the bots are playing against other bots that only have cold calls on the button in this particular one, so it's not like fishes being squeezed from weird spots kind of thing. From the sims I've looked at, you're supposed to get very, very tight against squeezes when you're neither closing the action nor going to be in position. So like say you open under the gun, button calls, and the blind squeezes. I largely play a lot of those situations just for better fold. I might not even have cold call ranges, and the cold call range, even in theory land, is very, 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 very narrow and defined. Lots of like pocket jacks, pocket tens, ace queen suited type hands. And I suspect if you just go four bet or fold in those spots, you're not, as a simplification, you're not giving up very much EV, and you're avoiding some trickier range split situations. And also because of the games you're in, you're going to have more squeezes where you're not going to be either in position or closing the action, and so you probably should have more folds. So I don't see anything here that tells me, yeah, you're doing some shit I think you should change. I'm just trying to get a feel for how your game looks based on the data. And then versus four bets, you're folding to four bets more than the bots are, given I'm betting your pool does not four bet frequently or bluff heavy enough. That's going to be a good response. Looks like a pretty consistent deviation both in position and out of position to the four bets. Maybe out of position your overfold is slightly more. Until you're playing in games or until the game's developed in a way where players are four betting both enough and with enough bluffs, I don't think this is going to be a big problem. A lot of those hands are very neutral in theory land anyway, and if the ranges get tighter and stronger, lived again to fight another day. No reason to get involved with that.
Yeah, I think there's a way to check is if the pool is actually under four betting or something like that. And if they're under four betting or they're too tight with their four bets, then like the correct counter would be to fold more.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We'll pull them up in one sec here and see if some of the things we expect to see are going on. You're 5-betting over 4 bets, a good bit less than the bots, but then again, that's probably reasonable. You probably don't get those ace-5 suited jams through nearly often enough. You probably don't face enough 4-bet bluffs, so not 5-betting as much is probably reasonable. The bots don't cold call 3 bets at all in this particular setup. You're doing it less than 1% of the time, which I assume is some combination of misclicks or some kind of very unique circumstance involving a fish being in the pot.
Or some type of alcohol-induced.
Yeah. Some kind of deviation from your usual strategy. But either way, it's happening such a minuscule portion of the time that it's not popping up. You're cold calling 3 bets 4 or 5% or something absurd like that. That there's a classical indicator of a fish type behavior. Yeah, you're not doing that, so I think that's good. Cold 4-betting, the bots do about 4%. You're at 3.5. That's probably pretty good. And then folding the cold 4-bet, you're over folding, but I have to imagine your pool is missing cold 4-bets and not finding enough of the light cold 4-bets. So that all looks pretty good to me. Let's compare some of this stuff to what the regs and the fish are doing in your pool here. This is the Michigan Pokerstars pool.
Yeah, I didn't even look at the fish, really. I was just so interested in what the regs were doing.
Yeah. Makes sense. Oh, and those stats, by the way, are also going to be largely filtered through hand-to-note style filtering to exclude, for how you're playing versus the regs. Like, so that's going to, you play a fish differently than a reg, and the people that wrote hand-to-note understand that, and the people that study based on that kind of thing understand that. So there's usually set to exclude, like, reg v fish hands when you're looking at their overall frequencies. So that would also explain.
Is there a parameter? What are the parameters to define a fish?
The way I have them set up is that to be a reg, your VPIP has to be under 35%. Your preflop raise has to be under 30%. Your gap between VPIP and preflop raise has to be no more than 12 or 13%. I think is where I had it set. Okay. Your open limp has to be less than 2%. So I mean, if guys that are open limping a lot, guys that are calling too much preflop and not, they're playing too passive preflop essentially, or just playing too many hands, period, those get you in the fish category. If you check all those boxes, you keep those stats in reasonable ranges, you're a reg. You miss any of them, you go into the fish category.
Got it.
And I've done most of my research on, I've done most of my playing the past few years and most of my research on Bovada and Ignition. And so obviously there where it's anonymous, you don't have long histories with players, not big databases on guys. You got to be a little bit loose with how you define these things to try to get them in the right category. You could probably tighten that up some for known player pools just because you can have large samples on guys and you can know. But, when I've got tons of guys with 30 hand samples, you got to kind of make a few sacrifices to make the numbers fudge out reasonably. Taking a look at how the regs are playing. Their VPIP is slightly loose. Their preflop raise is essentially perfect, 18.9. Calling the big blinds slightly more than the bots are. Calling in position slightly more. They're under 3-betting by about a tick and a half. They're under squeezing by about a tick and a half. These guys, they're looking awful damn passive to me. Like, look right here, all your post-flop aggression stats. I mean, 43 1-1 soft flop versus 51. I mean, I sometimes lose context on the 1-1 soft flop stat because it's not that relevant on Ignition, but 43% seems nit territory to me.
Yeah.
Aggression frequencies, they're missing global aggression frequencies by about 6-7 ticks. Flop aggression frequency, I mean, it's similar category. Turn, they're missing by about 4. River, they're missing by, Jesus Christ, like 9-10%.
It's like they're all just reading the newspaper.
Yeah, seriously. It's a table full of old men coffees. Those are the good players in the game. I mean,
right.
And right. Here I am in Ohio, pinned right between all the fishy player pools in PA and Michigan.
Yeah, really smack dab.
Yeah. They're getting to showdown decently, 28%. Although, given that there's so much less aggression, I think these stats all intermix in some way. You know, if you're hyper aggressive, you get the showdown less because you're winning so many pots with that showdown. These guys are passive and still not getting the showdown any more often than you are. And really, they're not winning at showdown a bunch more for how reserved they're playing. So they're, I mean, overall, I don't find these guys to look like they're particularly impressive world beaters as a whole. They look like they're not bluffy enough on the river. I mean, they're actually winning at showdown when they bet the river a bit more than the bots are, and then same thing with their raises. So they're betting in river. The river betting and raising ranges are a little bit too strong on average. Taking a look at how they play their RFIs, they're about on point under the gun. They're a little passive in middle position and cutoff. Yeah, I mean, let's see here. Where are they even making up? I guess their pre-flop raise, they're right about on point, but in a position by position standpoint, they're kind of missing them except from under the gun. They are folding to 3-bets, not nearly enough.
That's kind of what I noticed when reading this. It's just like they're just. Would that be a function of just because they're playing slightly tighter, therefore they have a more condensed continuing range, therefore they're not going to fold them often enough?
Probably slightly. Like they're a little slight with their RFIs by position, so some of those like absolute bottom of the barrel auto folds against the 3-bet aren't going to be there, so that's going to help pull that stat up slightly. Like they're continued to 3-bet. I think it's also a case of, I mean, like a weak reg and a fish are two different animals, of course, obviously, but like a weaker reg will exhibit some fishy type characteristics. A lot of that's going to be kind of like orienting themselves towards being too passive, like not enough folding, not enough raising, too much calling. So I'm willing to bet these guys are probably calling too many of the hands that are kind of marginal, right on the cusp right there, maybe even slight losers, in conjunction with not having some of the hands that should be auto folds against the 3-bet. I'm guessing it's a combination of that. But either way, I mean, they're folding about 8% less. We'll also take a look at the sizing stuff and see if maybe it's a sizing orientation thing, because the bots are going to have one particular fixed 3-bet size from each spot, and the pool may be seeing different stuff than that. So the sizing could impact it some too, although my initial suspicion is that it's just a question of them being a bit too sticky with some of the middling kind of cuspy potential 3-bet defends.
Got it.
They're 4-betting a little bit less than the bots, and slightly to a slightly greater extent than you were. Folding to 5-bets, they're obviously not folding to 5-bets very much. They're not 4-betting that much. These kind of passive traits that we expect to see from looking at data analysis keep showing itself up here. And then again, they're folding the squeezes a lot less. They're probably calling in spots where you don't have many, if any, cold calls. Like I said, where you're not in position or closing action kind of thing. And then again, like not having a few of those very bottom of the barrel auto folds in their RFI range to face the squeeze is probably part of it too. Folding to 4-bets slightly. I guess because they 3-bet a tick and a half. They 3-bet 8.5% instead of 10, so they're folding to 4-bets slightly less. That's probably by virtue of having a stronger 3-bet range. Looks to be pretty consistent across the positions. They are folding to 5-bets almost as much as the bots. You okay?
Yeah, I was just putting my standing desk up. And,
okay. Wait.
My video.
Got it. Okay. Thought you slipped and fell for a minute or something there. Yeah. And they're cold calling 3-bets like a little more than 1%. Cold 4-betting 3% versus 4, so they're not cold 4-betting quite as much, and less so than you. And then, interestingly enough, they are folding to cold 4-bets less than the bots. So I mean, where the general trend I'm seeing of the regs in your pool right here are going to be not quite aggressive enough and too willing to call. Or orienting themselves towards passivity, and then the post flop aggression stats are just blatantly out of whack.
What's that?
Post flop aggression. So pre flop they're slightly too tight and too passive, calling too much, not folding enough, not raising enough. And post flop, that is just magnified dramatically. You know, the pre flop is understandable, it's reasonable, it's not that far off for a pool as a whole, but the post flop aggression is just kind of shoddy. Take a look
It
at
all makes me smile to hear because these are all of my like base assumptions about how just the pool itself most of the regs are just nits and they just don't do anything to combat anything.
Yeah, I mean, is there like rakeback or VIP or something like that on Stars MI? I mean, is there?
I mean, there's rakeback, but it's like in the form of chests, and it's anywhere from like 100 to like that top level is only like 300 or 365 or something in the neighborhood.
Okay.
So it's not a significant amount. I have a hunch that because there's just more fish.
Yeah.
That people just don't really want to get involved, and they're just kind of waiting to just pick off the bigger players, like just vultures circling the.
It's it's the fish saturation is so heavy it attracts more bum hunters. Basically, they just want to sit there and play reserved and safe against anybody remotely competent and wait for the fish to give them gifts. Is kind of the crux of it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, like I figured it was either something like that or something like some like a volume incentivized rakeback system, like how ACR has, it's reg heavy with all these nitty vanilla grinders that just put in massive hours and try to max out the rakeback. But yeah, what you're describing certainly would I find that plausible too. The fish. Now we're going to start seeing some serious deviations. Regs play or bots playing 22%. Regs or fish playing almost 40%, with a 13% pre-flop raise. So your fish alias here as an aggregate is playing 39-13.
Yeah,
with a 5% 3-bet,
It's just like 9s plus ace queen suited and better.
I guess, yeah. I mean, we'll see if they shift much by position with their 3-bets, but yeah, they're certainly super passive. I mean, this is how fish play, and they tend to be pretty uniform. I mean, reg pools play differently to some extent based on the pool, but I mean, a fish is a fish is a fish almost universally. Some of them are aggro, some of them are looser than others, but they tend to follow the same typical trends and patterns for the most part. Defending big blind 46 versus 27%, calling in position 26-27%, where the bots do it 2.5%. That's I think that's a low rake or rake free environment right there. So in practice, that should be even lower.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. Their post flop aggression, they're 44% 1-1 soft flop. They're nitty passive post flop, a lot like the regs. Winning when the saw turn in the river, they're also too low. Their aggression, global aggression post flop 32 versus 37, and then insufficient aggression on both flop and river. They do find sufficient aggression on the turn, strangely enough.
Yeah, fish have a thing where if they bet the flop, they're not noticed. They're just going to continue.
Yeah,
they don't really like to give up.
Some of the best data influence lines against fish are basically involving just letting them, making like a pair, like even a weak pair, and just like, okay, you put as much money as you want, then I will call as much money as you want, and I'm gonna win most of the time because, they get to the flop with so much bullshit. At some point against a check, they start stabbing, and they often don't stop. I mean, right. They won't always go 2 or 3 streets, but they frequently do at least 2. And
the range is too merged, and then by the river, they're just making like equity-driven polar errors, like just criminal.
Yeah, I mean they just start so far to whack. Like looking right over here, I mean their entire foundation is totally fucked. There's nothing they can even if they were the greatest post flop players in the world, they just start with such a shoddy foundation. There's very little chance of coming back from it.
Yeah. The house is crumbling.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. That's why from like a philosophical or theoretical standpoint, I've been a big fan of, and I've heard other people sort of espouse similar approaches, is that you kind of be more grounded in theory the earlier streets, the earlier in the hand you get, and the later in the hand you get, the more you start dropping the hammer and taking advantage of exploits that you see. And and one thing is that it's like if I see a guy is folding too much to 3-bets pre-flop, I can just start 3-betting him mercilessly But the thing is, if I'm 3-betting 20-25%, you're gonna figure that out pretty quick. That's gonna stand out, and like you can play back at me. You can jam over the top. You can 4-bet. There are things you can do if you figure out that I'm out of whack, taking advantage of the way that you're out of whack.
Yeah.
A lot of the times, though, when you get to the river, these guys have butchered their range composition so fucking badly that even if they know something is screwed up, there isn't much they can do about it because they don't get there with the right arsenal to do anything about the exploit. So I'm there's different philosophies, of course, but I like the idea of being reasonably grounded in theory earlier in the street and getting more and more wacky the later on you go. Plus, it blends in better. If I'm going ham on river bluffs, you don't see nearly as many rivers you see me play pre-flop. So there's a bit of stealth aspect to it too.
Yeah, it's just sidebar. I've experimented with just playing absolutely fucking ape shit sometimes.
Yeah.
Excuse my language, but
Yeah,
talking 43, 32, 18, just nuts.
Yeah.
Literally almost half the deck. And I mean, it does. Poker does have to work in your favor sometimes, to do that. But when it does, you just own the table and no one does anything about
it. Yeah. From already just based on a one broad level, one sheet overview of the players in your pool, these don't seem like the kind of guys that are taking a stand very often. It seems like they're sitting back, like you said, they're sipping their coffee, they're reading their newspaper, and they're waiting for Ace King.
Yeah, I feel like the bad guy because I just sit there, kind of talk and smack a little bit on the table. I've been muted by a couple of guys because it's just I guess I'm the bad guy.
Yeah, the chat of online poker is what might have been my favorite thing about it ever. I mean, the bad players dumping unfathomable amounts of money is pretty cool, but the high level discourse that is online poker chat is something you can't find anywhere. It makes Twitter and YouTube comments look insightful.
Yeah, right.
Let's see here. They're post flop. They're getting to showdown less than the bots, probably because you can bluff their shitty ranges on the river so much. They're winning at showdown substantially less than the bots are. About 5% less. When they bet the river, they're winning less. When they raise the river, they're actually winning more. So fish river raises might be reasonably strong, but fish river bets, like you said, we just close our eyes and click call and let the math work itself out in the long run. Their RFIs, I mean, they are not terribly positionally aware. I mean, taking a look here, under the gun, they're raising 15, middle position 17, cutoff 20, button 26. And then you've got all these open limps right here, too, open limping, 18 to 20% in all those spots on top of the raises. So, their raises are a bit tight, but then when you mix in all the weak limpy shit, their ranges overall get pretty weak. Blind on blind, they're only raising 22%, and then open limping another 37-38%. I mean, this is all consistent with all the other fish data I've ever looked at, but it's still nice to see it bear out. And then, not folding the 3-bets. I mean, look at 58 versus 28% fold the 3-bets. So it's like a more extreme version of the regs that are kind of shifting towards passivity. Is that we faced the 3-bet, we're not going to fold, we're not going to 4-bet, so we're just going to call. Somewhere right in the middle. It's dramatic underfold to 3-bets both in position and out of position. Under 4-betting, they're missing about half their 4-bets. They're not folding to 5-bets because they're not 4-betting, so by the time they 4-bet, they're not folding, so there's not much reason to 5-bet bluff a fish. I mean, I think that's probably intuitive, even with having never looked at any data. I think just play a couple orbits of poker, you kind of figure that one out.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Yeah, okay, good. And they're not folding the squeezes either. I mean, and then not folding the 4-bets in position or out of position. 5-betting, they actually find enough 5-bets just because they don't 3-bet that much. So, like you said, you really can't 4-bet bluff the fish that much. I have different ranges versus a 3-bet that I use versus fish and versus regs. Versus fish to the extent that I have, a 4-bet bluff, if you will. It's almost more of a merge, like I'm playing ace-queen offsuit for blocker potential because it picks up more folds and actually plays pretty well post-flop. It's almost more of a linear type thing as opposed to a polarized range. and it's going to be more value heavy. I'm going to have 75 or 80% of hands that call off versus a 5-bet jam, and maybe one hand like an ace queen offsuit or something that I'll play it as a 4-bet and pick it up pre-flop or play post-flop, and do have a few hands that fold to a jam kind of thing. But this all seems like what I'd expect. And here they are cold calling 3-bets about 10% of the time. Like I have like a dumbed down HUD for Bovada because I don't get lots of stats on guys. It largely is just a fish indicator. And open limping and cold calling 3-bets are my two go-to stats for IDing a fish. Like absent knowing any other information about a guy, a player open limping or a player cold calling 3-bets are almost telltale giveaways. And I mean,
like a donk line or something like that.
Donking is the third one on there. Is like my top tier fish indicators. And you saw right here, like the regs were cold calling 3-bets 1%, fish doing it 10%. The regs are not open limping. I mean, it sounds pretty obvious to anybody that's played poker, but the data shows it night and day there at the same time. Almost every cold call of 3-bets comes from someone in the fish profile. Almost every open limp comes from someone in the fish profile, with the limited exception of maybe blind on blind, because there's a theoretically justifiable strategy that involves open limps from blind on blind. I'm not big on implementing it. I think just raise or fold is probably just about as good and 100 times easier, but you can at least justify a player that knows what they're doing that. And then folding to cold 4-bets, nope, they don't fold there either. So, fish even more so than the kind of weaker nitty regs. They don't raise and they don't fold. They just kind of call.
Yeah, they're almost one and the same.
Yeah. Basically, just more extreme versions of it. Let me see here, and then let's take a look at the. How we're looking at like sizing based here. So here's 3-bets in position, out of position. The red at the bottom is going to be the 4-bet. The green portion in the middle is the call, and the blue is the fold. So here's like button versus blinds. Tons of calls, not enough 4-bets, not enough folds. And then even when we look at the same sizing band right here, so we know the math breaks out the same and the frequency should be the same. So this is here for that roughly 4.5x size, of the 3-bet size from the blinds. Again, not enough 4-bets, missing about 4% out of 11 or 12. So they're missing about a third of the 4-bets. They are not folding enough. They're missing folds by about 7%, and they've got this big call region right here that it engulfs the correct call region both on the up and the downside. Some of those 4-bets end up being calls, and some of those folds end up being calls. Right. And we're seeing consistent patterns here where we do have sizing for the bots, in other RFI versus blind positions. Too much calling, not enough 4-betting, not enough folding. Looks pretty consistent over here in pretty much all of them. I guess under the gun they find a few more 4-bets, which they 4-bet about right when they RFI under the gun, but such a strong range. But even then they're still calling too much and not folding.
Yeah. Queen Jack offsuit under the gun.
Oh yeah. Well, I raised it, can't fold it now. Got to defend my children,
You can't leave them out there.
Yeah. No soldier left behind, I got 3 chips in the pot. I got to let my other 97 protect them. The regs here, looking at positional orientation, let me see here, here for upper left panel, that's button versus blinds. Regardless of sizing, they're actually not too far off. The folding frequency looks pretty good here, button versus blinds. The calling range is slightly too large, 4-betting slightly too small, but not that big a deal. And then when you account for the specific sizing band, that 4.5x size the bots are using, regs are overfolding slightly and looks like they're under raising. The call range is actually just about right. So it looks like they're missing a few 4-bets in position and folding them instead. Over here, cut off, again, missing 4-bets slightly. And now here they're overcalling, under folding. Mm-hmm. So I guess it looks like they fold about right on the button, but otherwise they're defending a bit too loosely in some of the other spots. Like here, doing okay on the 4-betting. Middle position, cut off, and under the gun. They're missing 4-bets a little bit, but it's a couple percent, like 12 versus 10. Still matters, but it's not a blatant, massive leak.
Right. When I scoped this out, the only real thing that I noticed was that they're overcalling slightly.
Mm-hmm.
That's really about it.
Yeah. And you know, and that isn't necessarily a reason to not 3-bet them more, because you can probably take advantage of them post flop. Like if they call too much pre flop against your 3-bet, your pre flop like 3-bets don't benefit immediately. But if then you pick up the pot on the flop with the small bet, you know, okay, you did even better than picking it up pre flop, because they put more money in then overfolded. So you have to think about how these things all chain together, which I'm sure you do. You know.
Yeah, I need to 3-bet more, but I mean, it's how much crazier can I go?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like against fish, I think I would do it a ton. I mean, against fish, like anything reasonable until somebody starts cold 4-betting you, which based on what I saw in the data and based on what we're talking about, you know, anecdotally how these guys play, not too many guys are going to be like, oh, but babaBINK's going after him again. You know, I should play back at him. They're not doing it. You know, they might even recognize that you're out of line, but they're still not doing anything about it. So, you know, if they don't take advantage of it, you know, keep doing it until somebody makes you stop.
Right.
Looking at some of the sizing based stuff for big blind defense against an RFI. Let me see here. Blind on blind, that's the first panel right here. That's a good one to look at, because that's where players often play pretty weak. Regardless of size, regs are not 3-betting it, and God, they're missing 3-bets a ton. Bots are 18-19%, and regs are about 12, and they're over folding. Jesus Christ, this is 2024, and you're getting the 9-10% overfold blind on blind.
It's pretty much any two cards, blind versus blind. Against some guys, like I have a stat in my HUD that will specifically show like how often they raise blind versus blind, and if it's like sub, I usually use the 20% marker. That's what I've always known. But like if it's anything like sub 15, like it's literally any two cards I'm raising.
Yeah, I mean, because even if they're not overfolding, even if they're just turning 3-bets into calls and defending the right frequency but without enough aggression, you're still benefiting by at least getting 3 cards of flop equity realization right there. So a lot of those hands that are slight losers become winners right off the bat before any post flop stuff comes into effect. So I mean, this lack of 3-betting even from the regs is, you know, something that can be taken advantage of. I'm assuming you go 3x blind on blind. I mean, that's pretty common. That what you use.
You for the most part, but like this month I've been experimenting with 2.5. It's for experimental purposes. Don't really have any info on whether that's, you know, more optimal than 3, but just for I think if guys are overfolding too much, then there's no reason to, like, you just risk less.
Yeah.
So
it's
my only logic behind it, really.
Yeah, no, that's reasonable, and you know you can construct the 2.5x RFI range just as easily as a 3x RFI range, you know, and the strategy, it's not going to change things that dramatically. It can still be done without leaking EV in a theoretical sense, so there's certainly nothing wrong with it. Looks like they're 3-betting 14% against the 2.5x, 14% against the min raise, 12% against 3x, and then about 9% up in that 3.5 to 4 type range. So they are getting a bit more aggressive against the smaller sizes. And it looks like against that min raise type size, they are calling a good bit more. See, they're only folding 40% versus 50% or 53%. But, you know, regardless of which size you choose, you're going to be taking advantage of a mistake. It's not like I'm going to be able to find anywhere in this data where they're perfect against one size and drastically like making huge mistakes against another. These mistakes are going to largely populate across all different sizing options. You know, some are better than others, but all are going to be good. Against the most common size and the size that we have bot data for, you know, they're missing raises by 6-7%. They're missing calls by about 4%, and then they're overfolding by about 10%. You know, whichever size you're comfortable with or find to be working, I think is going to be pretty good there, blind on blind. The bottom line is that you should be playing wider than theory against these regs, because they're just rolling over and surrendering their blinds way too often. I mean, a 10% overfold is pretty damn mind blowing.
I mean, that's criminal. Like, it's like you're just getting away with crime.
Yeah. They're letting you steal, and I mean, how hard is it to internalize a starting hand chart? I mean, for God's sakes, like pre-flop leaks are not that hard to fix in this day and age. I mean, starting hand charts that are properly constructed by solvers are available all over the place. I don't even think you have to pay any money. Can't you get GTO Wiz like some stuff for free, including like pre-flop ranges? Like
pre-flop is free.
Yeah. So this right here, this isn't even a question of like this is hard to justify if I'm trying to like make an argument in favor of these guys and defend them. Like this to me is just laziness. Like I mean, you could clear this up. Like if I was trying to teach a beginning poker player that hadn't played in 15 years or had very little exposure to the game, this would be an unacceptable leak to be persisting like a week or two into training. Like this could be corrected very easily, and you're not doing it, and you could just because you either refuse to do the work and do the research, or you refuse to implement it in the games, even though you know it's correct. I mean, so this is very hard to justify.
Yeah,
and it's a pretty big.
It's not a small sample size either.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Not at all. I mean, you sent me, I think I got about 400,000 hands I end up using from what you sent me, and that's the regs are a little bit more than half of that. So you've got, how many data points did we have on the regs? Yeah, I've got 1.3 million data points on the regs, and this is very clearly statistically significant right here, and it's just a big mistake. Looking at how they're defending big blinds from some of the other spots.
It seems to be the general theme in all of the spots from when I briefly looked at it was that they're just under raising and over folding and just not be just.
Yeah. And you don't need to do this kind of thing where you sit there and pore over every piece of data and start doing brute force research. Like you can very quickly recognize trends like you're saying and like we're seeing here right now. Like it's the data is a mathematical expression of what's going on, but the leaks and the mental shortcomings that cause that to happen or tend to kind of extrapolate over all parts of the game tree. I mean, I think I heard Solo saying somewhere in like some YouTube video or something like that like if he knows like your aggression frequencies, like by street and like your 1-1 soft flop and 1 to showdown, he knows everything he needs to know about your profile of player right there. You're not gonna have a guy that's massively out of line on one street and a huge nit on the other, 99% of the time. You can extrapolate these trends over all different things. And I mean, that's kind of what poker is at its core. It's pattern recognition and extrapolating what you know about those patterns to solve the spot because, humans don't memorize the entire game tree of poker. It's not possible. A computer bot can do it, but the rest of us, we just have to kind of observe trends and apply what we see from those trends. So yeah, what you're saying makes sense to me, and I very much agree with it. Looking at some other big blind defense here from the regs, 2.5x standard size open from the button. They're missing 3 bets by 3-4% out of the big blind. They're missing calls by about 4%, and then they're overfolding by about 8%. So going ham from the button, even on regs and the blinds, is going to be good business. The cutoff, they're overfolding slightly, only about 2%. And it looks like it's in the form of mostly missing 3 bets. And they're actually of the 3 bets, it looks like maybe 1% becomes an extra call, and the other 2% become fold. So again, they're slightly too loose with the calls here. They don't overfold in that spot. They're not overfolding for the earlier spots for the most part. That's pretty consistent. But the button, they're both overfolding. Versus the button, they're both overfolding and under raising. And from the other spots, they're at least under raising. So, what we saw earlier, you going a bit loose with some of your RFIs, entirely justified by what we're seeing here. And in fact, it's the proper response to do. For posterity's sake, we'll look at how the fish are dealing with big blind defense against different sizes, and I expect we're going to see even more extreme examples with the regs. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're 3-betting blind on blind 6%. They're actually overfolding as well, in a bunch more calls. When you look specifically at the correct sizing band, it's again about a little bit less than 6% versus 18.7. So they're missing about 13% of the 3 bets blind on blind, and they're finding just less than 6. So they're finding about a third of the correct 3 bets they're supposed to find blind on blind. So they're overfolding on top of that by about 5%. So fish are almost certainly like blind on blind versus a fish, just like play with napkins. Any 2 cards, you go after them and figure it out post flop, because you're going to pick up so much of an advantage here pre-flop just by the overfold and then getting to see 3 cards on the flop. Before we even talk about how badly they are post flop, you're already going to start printing just by going after them. So No sense giving the fish any leeway. Don't show them any mercy.
Right.
And then here, the button against a button RFI 2.5x. They are not overfolding, but they're massively overcalling and under raising. And we're going to see this same shake right here. A little bit of red, ton of green, too little blue. Yeah, and the overcall is just dramatic. Okay. Nothing terribly surprising, but interesting to see. I've never looked at this particular pool before, so it's good to know. Let's take a look at some post-flop stuff next. Guess we'll look at the regs first. So any formation, this is going to be regardless of pre-flop line or, the pre-flop formation, number of bets, any of that. This is going to be how they, just take a look at how they're playing the flop, the turn, and the river, regardless of formation and bet size. So this is like a very top-level global thing right here.
Yeah, when this loads, can you, I believe I understand, but can you briefly explain, this is obviously fold, check, fold.
Yeah, So this is against a bet on the flop. How often they're folding, or to some extent calling or raising right here. So this is the regs we're looking at, and this is against any flop bet what they're doing. So globally, they're overfolding the flop bets. It's like about 6%. They are undercalling by about 5%, and then they're missing raises by 1% or 2%. Okay. So before we even, just a top level picture of the flop play, they fold too much, they call too little, and they raise a little bit too little. This second chart here, this is a buy size. It's a best fit line. So what we have here, the points that you see are the actual data points from the data, and then the line that's drawn in is a mathematical approximation of where that line would fall across all possible sizes. So the line is not observed in the data, the line is estimated based on the data that we have, but the points are straight from the data. Okay. So what we see here, the red line here is the regs, the blue line is the bots, and what we're seeing here is that red line is going to be a higher percentage or higher frequency for folding pretty much universally. They never cross. So the regs are overfolding compared to the bots against any particular size. The bottom axis right here, it starts at 0, like the lowest data point I have here is a 10% size, and then it increases as you move across to the right. And so what you're seeing is that the fold frequency should be increasing as the bet size increases, just because the smaller the bet, the more you continue, the larger the bet, the more you fold. Right. But what we're seeing right here is that a pretty universal trend of the regs are overfolding the flop against any size. I'm not sure that any one size jumps out at me as being universally better than any of the others, but the general idea here is that they are overfolding, period. And then we're looking at how often they're folding based on the RFI position to see if, looser formations or tighter formations indicate, some kind of change in the way they play. The overfold for a small blind RFI, so this is a blind on blind spot. So this is either you're raising first thin on the regs, or the regs are raising first thin on you, and you get to the flop in some fashion, whether it's just by a single raise pot, 3-bet, 4-bet, whatever. They're overfolding the flop bets compared to the bots significantly. That's 11-12% overfold blind on blind. So when I said earlier that blind on blind is where you often see some of the worst play, here's a prime example of that right there. I mean, that's a massive flop overfold. The button's also pretty significant. That's another 6-7% overfold right there.
This is whether or not they raise the button or I raise the.
Yeah, this is just the raise first in came from the cutoff. Because we're looking at any formation, the player could be either side of that. So this is how often the regs are folding the flop based on where the RFI came from pre-flop, which position it is, and it doesn't matter if they're the ones making the raise first in or defending the raise first in. It just is. You get to the flop in a formation where the hand pre-flop started with the raise from that spot. Am I explaining that well? It's a bit of a mouthful, but
I mean, in short, they just overfold everywhere, regardless of.
Yeah, and it's more dramatic in the looser positions, the flop overfold, but they're overfolding everywhere. Like an under the gun spot, it's only by about 3%, middle position by about 4%, but you see it gets up to 11-12% over here, blind on blind. Yeah, that's the takeaway from what the numbers say is that they overfold everywhere, and the looser the formation, the later the position the raise came from, the more dramatic the overfold is. The bottom down here is going to be textural based. So this is how often they're folding versus the bot frequencies on specific textures. Ace high right here, overfolded, king high, queen high. I mean, looks like they're overfolding pretty much every texture.
Except
A trip, yeah, and that's going to be such a rare frequency. Like I've got a 5 or 6% standard deviation across this entire sample of hundreds of thousands of hands because a trip flop, a flop with 3 of the same card is so infrequent, so rare that one, it doesn't really matter to study that much anyway because it's such an unusual spot, and we can't trust the data as much there because there's so much more noise in it. But the general trend is holding pretty much across all formations. I can't imagine they're doing much better on that trips board in reality. It's probably just a small sample thing. But I mean, you're seeing here overfolds, and without even looking at the exact numbers, you see the red bar much higher than the blue bar for literally every single flop texture, with potentially the exclusion of the trips.
Yeah, just one clarification point. 3 in a row is like 6, 7, 8, something like that.
Yeah. Three in a row is going to be any flop where as straight as possible. So it could be like 6, 7, 8. Could be 6, 7, 5 kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand.
Or 6, 7. Any. It doesn't have to be literally 3 in a row, but 3 are connected with a straight possible. Two connected means like 8, 9. 2 gap means like 8, 7, and then a third straight card, and disconnected means no straight draw possible.
I got you. Okay, cool.
And let's see here. Let's take a look at what the fish are doing. I'm sure this will be a bastion of excellent play.
What a cool system.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool. I mean, like we've been running for a little less than an hour right here. We've already got a real good picture of how the entire player pool is playing both pre-flop and on the flop right now. Fish overfolding flop again pretty significantly. They're under calling and under raising. That best fit line shows fish folding more than the bots are, pretty much every size. It starts to get a little murky up here. Some of these absurdly large sizes, I wouldn't put too much stock in that because it's going to be real small samples. Like, yeah, this is a 4x pot that I've got a big standard deviation of 6.3%. So I wouldn't put a ton of faith in that, but I don't know how often you're betting 4x pot on the flop. I imagine it's probably not truly relevant to any of our games, I'm guessing that comes up in like some 3 or 4 bet pots where the move is just like jam on with a hand that's good or a draw that's good and a board that's super coordinated. Like, you're not, even guys that use flop over bets in single raise pots, they're usually like 125% or something like that. They're not these crazy massive large ones. The overfold by position, again, we're seeing a big blind versus blind deviation, though not as bad as the regs. They actually don't overfold as badly as the regs, who are up over 40% and they're at 38. So still bad, but not as bad as the regs. And a similar trend here is where the overfold exists regardless of how loose the position or formation is, but it gets more dramatic the looser the ranges get, the wider the ranges get, the looser the formation. And then taking a look at the textural stuff, I'm seeing red lines well over the blue lines on, again, trips is kind of a weird one. I wouldn't put a ton of faith in that, but the general trend is holding across all the other formations right there. So, I mean, your player pool is just giving up pre-flop a lot or being too loose with the calls pre-flop and not aggressive enough, and they're folding to the flop a ton too. So these are pretty good games to say the least. From what I'm seeing, you've got a large ratio of fish. From what we looked at, it was something like 1.5 regs per fish in your sample as a whole, which is pretty damn good. You're talking maybe 2 fish per table on average. That's a good game. And then even the regs you do have are, I mean, I'm sure there's a few guys that are pretty damn good, but by and large, even the regs are, they're not going to give you any problems.
Right.
We'll take a look at how you're dealing with the flop overall, too, if you'd like.
Sure. I don't mind exposing, I mean, there's obviously some things that can be kept close, but, for the most part, it doesn't matter. I don't think anybody's going to adjust their game or completely alter and, know how to study this, that, or whatever. So it doesn't.
the odds somebody's watching my 500 channel, the 500 subscriber YouTube channel to get a read on you and start making a hard counter is,
There might be some, but
yeah,
I mean, just for them to do the work and
yeah.
actually put it in, like, actually execute and do the work, it's not gonna happen. So
Yeah, I think it's pretty unlikely. Now your flop fold is much better. You're almost right in line with the bots, maybe underfolding by about 1%. And the aggression is good there. You're raising the flop a ton. You're raising about 6% more, though I'm guessing that the players are folding a ton when you do this. So we can check how often they bet fold in a minute too to see for sure. You're calling less, but you're raising more. You're not overfolding, which is the big thing. Uh, your your fold frequency is based on size. For anything up to like the small overbet looks really damn good. Your lines are tracking almost perfectly right there. So your flop play is probably pretty damn good overall as far as not overfolding goes. And then, you're raising more than you're calling, though I bet that's probably incentivized by everything we've seen. Uh, you're underfolding the flop blind on blind. Although that's actually not big. That's only about 2-3%. That's not too bad. And then it looks like you are, so you're a slight overfold blind on blind, but not, I mean, the regs were doing that over 10% and you're at 2 or 3, so you're much better off than they are, obviously. And then it looks like you're underfolding the flop in other spots, but I'm guessing you're taking well advantage of things on later streets, so I don't view that as a leak based on everything I've seen from your results right there. And it's also not dramatic. I mean, you're off by a couple percent, but all good. Textural type stuff, your lines are lining up a lot closer too. I mean, I'm trying to see anywhere where there's a big deviation. Maybe some of the low boards right here, you're deviating somewhat. Although that's, again, your fold is lower right here, so I'm going to have a much easier time stomaching an underfold in the flop than an overfold, because if you overfold, you're just getting abused. You're just leaking right there. If you're underfolding, it's a possible leak, but it may be something you're taking advantage of on later streets right there. So, I mean, you're overfolding on the 3 in a row flops by a couple percent, and the monotone flops. If I'm gonna overfold flops, those are probably a couple of good places to start, just because I'm expecting that the betting's going to be a bit stronger from the player pool on those type of boards. The monotone flops, they get a little bit scary on. Those tend to be underbluffed historically. Straight possible flops are similar. So nothing jumps out at me here as going, this is a big mistake or something I would work on. It all looks pretty damn good to me. Let's take a look at. Let's take a look at
ACR regs. Is that what you want to look at?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I don't want to do that. Thank you. Good catch. Stars MI regs. Let's take a look at how they're dealing with their flop betting.
Okay, so this is when a reg bets the flop.
Yeah, so this is the other side of what we looked at, how they're defending against flop bets. This is how often they're going to be checking or betting flops. So, they're checking slightly more, although that's like 0.5%. They're pretty much right on point with their betting frequencies. This the by size, the middle chart in the top row is going to be like a sizing base breakdown. So the check right here is similar. The small bet, they're using 21.4. The bots are using 21.7. Half pot, they're almost never using, or the bots are almost never using. Regs are using that about 10%. And then these, 3/4 up around pot and overbets, they're tracking pretty closely. So their betting frequency and size choices is pretty damn good. Maybe they're using half pot a bit more than the bots like, and small bet a bit less, but that's, with everything else I've seen from these guys, that's like the epitome of a nitpick at this point to call that a leak. I mean, that's actually pretty damn good overall. The betting frequency based on position, it looks like they're betting slightly more blind on blind, but we're talking 0.5% difference. Button is identical. Cutoff is virtually identical. And then they're slightly too passive in the earlier spots, but we're talking, 1% or 2. And in the grand scheme of things, this is a spot they're playing pretty well, how often they bet the flop and how they bet the flop.
Yeah.
Texturally speaking, they are betting the flop a bit too much. On ace high flops, my thought on that would be There's probably a lot of like small betting or range betting still going on ace high flops, and ace high flops, a lot of them can be a bit more polarized. Like ace high flops are some of the spots where you see some of the larger bets used on the flop as a continuation bet. So it may be a case of they're just using more smaller sizes as opposed to fewer larger sizes. The other board textures, actually it looks like the betting frequency is pretty good. The trips board, they're not betting nearly as much as the bots are. The bots find bets there 56, 57% versus about 41. A very infrequent spot, not that worried about that.
Yeah.
And then on the spots where the top pair is paired, it looks like they're checking a good bit more. They're betting the bottom paired flops, where there's a paired card with the bottom card. So you got top pair, then two low paired cards, or lower paired cards at least. They're betting that pretty well. When top pair is the one that's paired, they're not betting that as often as the bots do. But overall, their betting strategy and frequencies in the flop seem pretty good. Let's take a look here, see if we can get some showdown strength information from these guys here as well. So this will be how often they're winning at showdown in these particular lines. Let's see here. Showdown strength. When they bet the flop and they get to showdown, they're winning about the same as the bots. They're this is an imperfect measure of range strength and composition, but much better than nothing if you don't have exposed hole cards. But it looks like their checking range wins at showdown and their betting range wins at showdown a reasonable period of time. Their over betting range, when they ultimately get to showdown after over betting the flop, they're winning a bit more than the bots are, which means they're probably over betting too strong a range when they over bet. Or the larger bets, that's probably going to be a bit more significant. Although actually we have a large sample here for overbets actually too, so these are probably significant statistically speaking. Their range is slightly too strong when they overbet, and too strong significantly when they bet bigger bet on the flop. That's going to be anywhere from that 60% to full pot size. So if you're looking for some tricks or secrets on what their flop betting and bet sizing tells you, the larger flop bets might be a bit more indicative of strength from the regs in your pool. The smaller bets and checks seem to be about appropriately strength, but the bigger bets and over bets tend to be value heavy. Make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's something that I'm somewhat familiar with anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's anything groundbreaking either, but it's good to confirm these things while we're looking.
Yeah, definitely.
Let me see here. Can't get meaningful stuff on the range comp or range splits. I'll take a look at how the fish then are playing their betting frequencies and strengths. The fish are checking the flop a couple percent too much and then betting a bit too infrequently by about 4%. Taking a look here, the fish are not using small bets. They're only using small bets about 5% of the time, whereas the bots are 27%. Fish missing over bets or fish missing small bets is another. It's almost a trope. It's such another indicator of how fish tend to play. They are using the half pot bet a lot more, 18%. So a lot of their small bets are becoming half pot bets. Which it's actually kind of funny because half pot actually works pretty well in a lot of spots as an exploit based on the stuff I see in the data. And it's the fish who are the one who are using it more than the regs. Like a half pot bet often tells you it's a fish, but it's something a reg could use to their advantage in a lot of spots. Like I've been playing a few sessions lately. I haven't played all year until maybe a week or two ago. Been playing a few sessions lately, and I've definitely been using that half pot a lot of times, like stabbing in position, like stabbing versus miss C bets on the flop or the turn kind of thing seems to work pretty well. But yeah, the fish are using that size bet more often than the bots would be doing. Looks like they're using bets up around pot much. The bots didn't use a pot size bet at all on the flop right here, but the fish are using about 7%. It looks like the fish are betting more on the flop in the blind on blind spots pretty significantly, about 7%. Maybe some room for checking to fish blind on blind when they're in the big blind to let them put too much money in too frequently and play like a check call or check raise strategy. Maybe something here based on this. And then in the other spots, they are not betting nearly often enough. They're under betting the button formations. It's pretty significant by about 6%. The other spots they're under betting as well, but it's not as dramatic as you get looser going from under the gun to the button. They miss more and more bets, but it's the big deviation here is blind on blind. I'm guessing they're either betting too much blind on blind after raising, and they also don't raise very much blind on blind. They were only opening like low 20%, so that's part of it. And they're probably stabbing big blind against a small blind check an awful lot on the flop.
Yeah, that's what I would think too.
Yeah, and we could answer that question in more detail if we want. I can get more granular than just looking at any formation. You can look at that formation. We'll run out of time eventually, but
yeah. Right.
And then looking here, like formationally, looks like they're missing bets. Not so much the ace high boards, but like the king and queen high boards, and then as the high card gets lower, their betting frequency gets better. Missing a tons of bets when the top pair on any kind of paired flop actually. Missing bets on rainbows, not as much on two-tone, and they actually bet too much on monotone. So there's a trend right there as far as the suitness of the flop goes. Monotone flops, they bet too much. Two tones, they're pretty close, and then rainbow flops, they don't bet nearly frequently enough. Yeah, what's that?
It just seems so odd.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, who knows? They're probably overvaluing weak one card flush draws, and they're probably desperately trying to protect marginal pairs from that fourth suit card hitting. Would be my stab at a fish logic. I don't want to get too far inside their head lest I become one of them, but
yeah, that makes sense to me though.
Yeah, that's it. Who knows? Maybe I'm right or maybe I'm wrong, but it at least sounds plausible. And then the disconnected flops, they're not betting enough. I mean, a lot of those flops that are disconnected, it's so difficult for the defending player to defend against that I assume you're supposed to bet those by and large at a pretty high frequency, and the fish just aren't doing that. The gapped cards are the ones with straight draws. They're missing some bets, but not too bad. And the connected flops where straights are possible. Or I'm sorry, these are both draws. These are connected and gapped, and they're missing a little bit. And then they're actually like perfect right down to the 10th of a percent as far as the straight possible flops. Just coincidental, I assume, but interesting to see. But yeah, they're overall they're not betting enough, but they are betting too much in the blind on blind spots. Their sizing mix is a bit off. Not enough small bets, too many half pot bets, and a bit more of the larger bets, which I'm assuming are going to be more strength oriented. And then the biggest thing I see texturally is the suitness. There's a deviation where the closer you are to a flush being out there, the more they're overbetting, and the drier they are from a suitness perspective, the more they're missing bets. Take a look at their showdown strength and their bet lines. Let's see here. When they check the flop, they're not winning at showdown on the river nearly often enough. When they bet the flop, they're also not, but it's not as dramatic. Just by virtue of getting to the flop with such a shitty range, they've got so many weak hands, they just can't win at showdown if they get them all the way there. So that makes sense.
Just like one and done. It seems like.
Yeah. Well, this is no matter what happens after the flop bet, this is if they get the showdown, they won. So this could be them barreling off. This could be one and done or anything in between.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's just for a measure of if they take this line at all, which at this point is just a flop bet. How strong is their showdown range on the hands when they see showdown? Blind on blind after betting the flop. They're not winning enough. They're not going to win enough after betting anywhere. It doesn't seem like their range deviates their range strength doesn't deviate very much based on position. It looks like their range is too weak when they bet the flop and get to the showdown regardless of the position. I don't think anything real dramatic is showing up there. And I think the third flop thing worth looking at that would be kind of cool would be the bet folding, how they're playing against raises when they bet and face a raise, which I think we'll take a look at what you were doing there and see if that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And then this will filter for like boards where you can actually like exploit them for overfolding.
Yeah, we might see some textural stuff here where they bet fold too much in certain spots. Okay, so when they bet and face a raise, the regs are overfolding by about 6%, undercalling by about 5%, and then missing a 3-bet by about 1% of the time. The raise size being used doesn't seem to matter too much. They're overfolding against all of them. pretty decent gap between those lines right there too. So your heavy flop raising strategy, you know, I'm guessing you were aware of that. You didn't just back into it. You don't seem like you're doing these things by accident, but it certainly is correct. Based on what the pool is doing, you know, they're letting you get it with the raises. They're not 3-betting you quite often enough, and they're folding way too much. So what reason is there not to raise? You get all the good results and none of the bad results.
Yeah, right. Let's go.
Yeah. Bet fold in a small blind formation. They're over folding by about 7%. These button spots, so these you know, regs aren't donking out of the big blind versus the button very often. So this is going to be mostly how often they raise the button and then face a check raise from the big blind on the flop.
Right.
Over folding there, 35 versus 44, 9% there. The cutoff is closer. That might just be noise or dumb luck, but then we see it getting back larger again here, middle position under the gun. You know, 40 versus 35, 40 versus 34, and 38 versus 36. I mean, they are overfolding, you know, to these flop raises in any spot. It's most dramatic button versus big button in button formation, small blind formation, but it's pretty universal. I mean,
right.
None of this is a reason to not raise the flop in some spots or others. This is still pretty good reason to raise the flop. Some spots better than others, but all pretty good. Let's see here. Overfolding on the ace high flop significantly. I'm willing.
What I wanted to see here.
Yeah, I'm betting the pool probably raises ace high flops too strongly. So this is probably a reasonable adjustment to what the pool is doing. At the same point in time, you know, it doesn't mean you can't take advantage of it. You know, just because the pool is raising flops, like I'm assuming ace high flops too strong, and then the pool is responding by overfolding against those raises, doesn't mean you can't take advantage of the overfold by raising weaker on those textures at the same time. So, I mean, we're seeing a big overfold here on the ace-high flops. It narrows a bit on king-high, but it could be some noise. The queen-high flops and jack-high flops are still pretty dramatic. And really, even the lower flops, I mean, they're overfolding all of them, some more dramatic than others. I guess no matter how high or low the high card in the flop is, you can check raise. Unpaired flops, they're overfolding. All the paired flops, the bottom paired flops, they're overfolding big time. So that lower paired flop, which, you know, I mean, that could even be something like ace king king. The way this filter is, it just means the pair is the lower card, not the high card. But in practice, it's going to be more lower type cards that hit the big blinds range more often. But regardless of how or why they're getting there, they're overfolding these paired flops a lot. And this overfold on the lower, when the lower card's the one that's paired, is absurd. I mean, you know, I'd be willing to bet that if you put that into a solver, it just starts check raising pretty close to any two with an overfold like that. I mean, you could.
That's what I'm gonna start doing.
It'd be hard to go too ham when you see an overfold like that. I mean, Jesus Christ, that's absurd. They're overfolding the rainbow flops significantly. They're overfolding the two tones. The monotone flops, they are actually not overfolding. That one they're sticking around pretty good on. They're underfolding that one right there. Yes. So I guess if we're looking for some takeaways here on textural-based stuff for flop raises, the monotone flop is maybe the one spot where I'd be careful with it. And the paired flops, especially where the bottom card is the one that's paired, that's one I'm going to go absolutely ham on right there. Like disconnected flops, they're overfolding the ton. I guess it's hard to find the defense. You don't have natural draws, so that's another good spot to go real heavy on. That's about 9-10%. The gap ones, meaning there's draws, they're overfolding, and then the three in a row, they're not overfolding quite as dramatically, but they're still overfolding. I mean, it's going to be hard to get yourself in too much trouble by raising the flop based on what I'm seeing here. Yeah. Monotone's the one spot where it's a little dicey, but I mean, based on this, you could just blindly check raise like crazy and largely get away with it. And we'll pull up one other aspect we haven't looked at of this in a way that I think is kind of cool. We can actually see how you're constructing your ranges, your range composition, and your range splits compared to what the bots are doing.
Range splits slightly goes over my head a bit, but I mean,
you'll understand when I explain it to you. Having no background on it, I believe that, but I'm confident you'll get it right away once I show you and explain what we're talking about.
Sure.
Okay, and let's let's look at your betting or checking range. That'll be a bit more intuitive than the bet fold stuff here. So this is you compared to the bots for your flop betting strategy. So right now, the very first component, range, that just is what you get to this spot, your range composition by getting to this spot. So it's going to be less relevant on the flop, but more so on later streets where you can see if you're getting to the turn or river with a properly constructed range. So this right here is going to show us your air, your draws, your low pairs, your middle pairs, your top pairs, and then your 2-pair plus. Top pairs also includes over pairs. So this is any 1-pair hand, top pair or over pair, and then 2-pair plus for like a nut type range. You have slightly more air on the flop when you have a chance to bet than the bots do. But overall, you're getting there pretty reasonable. You're playing a looser range pre-flop because of the way the pool is playing. So in theory, your range should be weaker. That all checks out.
Yeah, the function of a flop overfold too.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, plenty of reasons to play more hands and have a slightly weaker range because you're more than going to make it up and then some. Your checking range, 42% air versus 40.7% air, pretty good. I mean, these bands are all lining up pretty good. So your checking range has got roughly the right composition of hands in all different hand class categories. Your betting range, let's see here. Looks like you're not betting quite as much top pair as the bots do by about 4% of your range. The other ones look pretty damn good. Guess you're betting slightly more low pair than the bots do. Do you do a decent bit of like range betting or like high frequency betting with small sizes?
Yeah, for the most part, yeah. Just because I'm aware of a flop overfold.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, on so many flop boards, you can just I mean, the EV leak from a simplified strategy is so small, and the counter strategy is so unrealistic for players to implement that you can just mostly blindly range bet boards even now and get away with it. It won't be perfect, but it's going to be, the odds of me getting the more complicated strategy correct and not leaking more value than the simplification strategy leaks is pretty damn low. And then when you get in mix in some of the player pool leaks where they're not even responding to it well, in fact they're responding to it poorly, that's justified. Your betting range is a few percent more heavy on the air, but overall it's pretty damn reasonable. Taking a look here now, sizing type stuff. This is that same idea for your range composition, but based on each individual size. Looks like your small bet's going to be more air heavy. That's by about 5-6%. So you're dumping a lot of extra air into that small bet size, which is incentivized by the pool overfolding. So I certainly like that. A deviation and a mistake are two different things. This is a deviation, but by no means a mistake as far as I'm concerned. Draw composition pretty close. A little bit more on the low pair. A little bit less on the top pair, but overall pretty reasonable. Which when you're betting larger sizes in the flop, what do you more typically use? Like a 3/4 type size, an overbet size? Like which ones you say are most frequent?
Most frequent? Probably either B67, B75, something like that, 2/3, 3/4.
Okay, so this 0.7 band is going to be anywhere from 60 to 80%, so that's probably the most common other size you're using. And here you've got a lower composition of air, 28 versus 32%. So when you're sizing up, you're dumping your air more so in the smaller size and less so in the bigger size, which again is probably pretty reasonable. Other than that, the stuff looks pretty good. You've got more top pair than the bots do. Is a percentage of your overall range in that bigger size. Again, probably pretty reasonable. And the other stuff all looks pretty good. The upper right panel is how your range splits, your range composition rather, based on position. Similar trends right here. I don't see you getting, you're not like hyper bluffy with air, in the looser positions relative to the other spots. I mean, you all look pretty much online. Your flop composition is probably pretty damn good, both in a theory sense and your deviations to take advantage of what the pool is doing seem pretty good to me too. Taking a look to see if anything textural is going kind of strange. More air in the ace high. More air. Trips, I think we can discount because it's such a weird spot. I should almost even just take that off. It's probably more confusing than informative at this point. Let's see. I mean, your air component, the first thing I'm looking to see if we just blast them, which doesn't have much anything going on. maybe slightly high in the ace high boards. Yeah, because you got 29% air versus 21% air on the ace high boards. So that's one spot where it's pretty big. King high, you're also up by about 7-8%. I'm guessing you're getting more respect on those boards though too as the pre-flop raiser. So I don't think that's necessarily a mistake. Just a spot where be aware you're deviating from theory. I guess is the point of this, particularly on some of the higher card flops. Other stuff all looks pretty good at first glance. Oh, it's already up. Okay. So the range splits. This is kind of the other perspective of the range composition. For the range composition, we were looking at when you checked or when you bet specific sizes for each of those actions. What sort of range composition you had, like how air heavy you were, how top pair heavy you were, how draw heavy you were for each different line. This is the reverse of that. This is taking for each hand class how often are you putting them into the different actions. So this right here, your air, this is how often you're checking, betting small, betting medium, that's the half pot size, big, that's going to be that 60 to 100% size, and then over bets up at the top. So this is taking a look at, this is basically to help you from a theoretical training standpoint, am I playing certain hand classes correctly or poorly? So what I see here, I mean, your air is checking slightly less than the bots, but only by a couple percent, 63 versus 65. These shapes overall are pretty similar. You're putting air into the medium bet size a bit more often than the bots are, 6.5 versus 3. And the small size is almost, you're betting. If you have air, you're betting air a small size about a quarter of the time, almost exactly what the bots are doing. Your draws, you are not checking quite as much as the bots are. And then you're putting those into the big size a bit more often. Seems to be the biggest deviation from what theory is doing. Low pair, you're checking less. Probably betting small. Betting small, pretty similar. You're putting them more into the medium sizes where the big sizes where the biggest deviation is from low pair. So you're turning some low pair checks into like medium or big bets as opposed to checks, but probably big deal either way. Your middle pair lines are looking real close to theory. I mean, your check frequency with middle pair is almost exactly what the bots are doing. You're off by 0.5%. Small bet size off by less than 1%, and the medium size, you're an extra percent right there. But the middle pair, you're playing almost perfectly theory oriented on the flop. Like freakishly close to theory.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Top pair, you're checking top pair 4 or 5% more often than the bots are. You're using the small bet size about 9% less, and using that big size about 5% more. Not necessarily unreasonable, just informative to be aware of it kind of thing.
I think a function of that is just due to the fish profiles too, because against fish I usually just pot.
Yeah, and this should be excluding the way you're playing against fish. This should be showing what you're doing against regs.
Okay.
Pretty sure. Yeah, it's I've got that exclude reg v fish filter locked in there, so it's probably not that, but you're also probably exploiting some weaker regs in the reg profile by doing some of the same stuff. So I mean,
okay, yeah, I just assumed this was both regs and fish.
Yeah. No, for the regs or for your own player pool, it's showing how you're playing versus the regs specifically. It's excluding the regs v fish or UV fish. Now that said, my setup here has a very binary division. Like a player is either a reg or a fish, and they're in one profile or the other. As we saw from looking at what these regs are, a lot of these regs are weaker, and you're probably, you probably view some of them as fish, or you're at least playing like them as fish in some situations because they're exhibiting fish-like tendencies. So that would certainly cause it. So if you're doing this against weaker regs and fish as well, that would explain it. And that's also a pretty reasonable thing too, just plink the fish to death with small bets. They don't have enough hands to defend, and then when you've got value, just start putting money in. And then your nutted type hands, you're actually checking your nutted hands, 2 pair plus a bit more than the bots are, 49.5 versus 46, 3-4%. Using the small size less by about 10%. Using the medium size more by 3-4%, the big size more by about 2-3%, and then the overbet's pretty close. So this is I don't think this is telling us anything too insightful about your game right here in this specific instance, but it is a good way to compare how you're constructing your ranges with different hand classes right there, which I think is a pretty cool thing to do.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, and I think a good way to kind of wrap this up is take a look at the turn and the river any formation type things like we did for the flop for a couple of profiles and see how they're doing on later streets. The way this tool works, aside from being able to look at individual lines like that in any formation, you can go ahead and start looking at any single raise pot, any 3-bet pot, any 4-bet pot, so any formation but filtered by number of raises pre-flop. Essentially, it's like a slightly more narrowed down version of this just broad post-flop look at. And you can also pull up individual formations to see how you or players are pulling each formation. So
wow. Yeah, I would. Well, yeah, I'm gonna have to spend some time.
yeah, like we're not going to go through every single one in the video. We'd be here all day. But like the way I like looking at these things, and I'm looking at a new player's stats or reviewing a new database, kind of from the get go, is do that pre-flop overview to get a feel for how players are playing, and then start with this post-flop stuff to see in general where the leaks are. Then if you want to start looking at individual formations, individual lines in those formations, you can do that too. I'd like to start as broad, top level as possible and start drilling down in more detail as we see things that catch our attention. We'll go take a look at how.
So what does the A mean?
A means any action. So
okay, that's
yeah.
what I thought.
So what I'm going to pull up here now is going to be the stars, MI regs, any formation, any flop action, and then turn, how often they're folding. So regardless of how they get to the turn. What did I do? I break something? I hope not. Log back in and see what's going on. Still a few glitches in this thing here and there, obviously, but first one that happened that broke down in over an hour and a half poking around, so it's reasonably stable, but I can still find a few spots where it screws up.
I mean, it's more than I could ask for. I mean,
Yeah.
This is an insanely valuable.
Yeah. I think it's a pretty cool tool. I'm glad some people
That's an understatement. Self some credit,
Yeah.
This is like, especially if you can get into specific players. I mean,
yeah, like if I can, I can already do it with what I have on the back end, but I can't just do it on the fly. Like it would take me some time to build up the databases and load them in. The ability to make it fully automated is missing, and that's a big upgrade, obviously, if I can add it. But at the moment we can't do that. Let's see here. Fish. Come on, you can do it.
What was it, Thomas? Thomas the Choo Choo Train? Come on, baby, juggle on.
It's like when I'm encouraging my geriatric kitty cat to eat some of her food to keep her weight up. Come on, kitty. I know you're nauseous, but you can do it. Okay, so at least for the fish profile, this popped up functional right here, right now. So this is a lot like we looked at. Their folding tendencies on the flop, but now this is going to be for the turn, regardless of how they got there. So any formation pre-flop and any flop action, whether it's a bet, whether it checks through, whether there's bets and raises and all that stuff. If we get to the turn somehow, some way, and the fish are facing a bet.
Yeah, so just universal overfolds, 100 calling, and their raising is actually pretty spot on.
Yeah, well, I think it's because turn raising is a spot where theory does it less than say the flop or even the river. So it's kind of like pre-flop with 4-betting. You have to 4-bet more out of position against a 3-bet than in position. A lot of even like ace king off and queens can be calls in position in a lot of spots. And because theory doesn't require as many 4-bets to get it correct, it's easier for players' natural tendencies to get closer to correct like that. But yeah, they are almost spot on with the raising frequency. Now they're still overfolding by about 7% and still missing calls by about 7%. Now we're seeing a little bit more interesting information here on the sizing chart and the best fit lines right here. We're seeing that the fish are the red line here. They're overfolding compared to the bots, but we're seeing here against the small sizes, they're doing pretty damn good. Like the 30% size, that 20 to 40% band. Fish are folding 32, regs are folding 30. So there's an overfold against that small size, but it's slight.
Right.
The half pot bet, they're folding 44% versus 33, based on the actual data points. And we see here this gap between the lines is growing as this bet size gets up out of that small bet range and gets a bit bigger. So, so it may be a case where when you're betting the turn against fish for folds, the half pot bet might not be, or I'm sorry, the small bet might not be as good, but a half pot or 3/4 bet or even over bets looks like they're all performing real well and getting tons of folds right there.
Yeah, you'd almost want to construct your range slightly differently, like put your stronger hands in the smaller bets potentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's completely out of whack with anything that's justified by theory. It's totally exploitable. But even the regs aren't taking advantage of you. There's no reason to worry about balance against a fish. If they were able to identify a lack of balance and take advantage of it, they wouldn't be fish. Hell, they wouldn't even be the regs in your pool for the most part. They'd be the top regs. So, until the fish show you they can take advantage of it, you may as well. We used to call it treating them like children. Like it's almost insulting the way you're playing against them, but they're not going to do anything about it. So, So
candy bars, man.
Yeah, exactly. Just taking candy from the baby. Let's see if positionally the overfold changes much. I mean, the folding frequency here on the turn is pretty consistent for the bots, regardless of the position, like 42, 44, 42. I mean, because they're constructing their ranges to have this all work out correctly. Right. So, and then the fish folding frequency on the turn also seems freakishly consistent. It's anywhere from 46.0 to 46.8. So it's deviating based on the position less than a full percent. So neither the bots nor the fish deviate positionally, but the fish are overfolding significantly, and that's consistent across all positions. So you don't need to worry about how loose or tight the formation is if you're bluffing fish on the turn. You just know that they're fish, they fold too much, and you can take from them. And positionally speaking, it looks like kind of the same deal here. The flop textures don't see, So this is for how they are facing turn bets based on what the flop texture is down here, right here.
Okay.
And so it looks like that, it looks like they're overfolding regardless of what the flop texture was, and it looks pretty consistent. Like nothing's jumping up as being a real dramatic spike one way or the other. So I think it's probably pretty texture independent as far as flop texture goes. We're on the turn now, so we can also look at turn textures by clicking that second tab down here. Ace turn overcard, they overfold. Broadway turn overcard, they overfold. Non-overcards, they're overfolding. So, pairing and non-pairing turns, double pairing, non-double pairing, paired to trips. I mean, they're finding way too many folds, regardless of what the turn texture looks like. Fish in general are not that. I mean, they're very much not positionally aware, as we're seeing out here in the upper right. That's another prime example of it. And they're, to a lesser extent, but still a pretty large one, they're not very texturally aware either. And we're seeing overfolds, dramatic overfolds, regardless of the flop or turn texture here on the turn. So I think whatever strategy you're using to go ahead and be bullying fish on the turn as well as the flop, I think it probably is going to consistently appear here as well again, too. See if the regs find a way to do any better.
Don't crash. I think we're good. Oh yeah.
It's a good start. Yeah, I don't know what caused that crash last time, but I guess I'm not really a coder, Okay, so same story here. Regs are facing the turn bet. Overfolding dramatically, Jesus Christ! But like in a global overfold in the turn by almost 12%, and we are in 2024, right? Like I didn't fall into some kind of time warp and go back in time 15 years. That's how regular players are playing in the current day and age. Like,
I mean, Michigan. Maybe it's just Michigan. I don't know.
I mean, I know there's weird stuff in the water here in the Midwest. Like I said, I'm in Ohio. I can't really talk shit about any state from Ohio, but Michigan's probably not all that different, I guess. But yeah, big overfold. They're under calling by about 10%, and they're missing 1.5% of raises on top of that. I mean, look at the sizing best fit line. I mean, it looks like a pretty consistent deviation between what the bots are doing and what the regs are doing. That overfold looks pretty consistent across any sizes. It's not even like it really going to matter what size you pick. And then a lot like we saw with the fish, you know,
Yes.
the folding frequencies for what the bots are supposed, you know, saying they're supposed to be are pretty consistent, and then the regs overfolding is pretty consistent too, but consistent to an overfold by about 10%. So, I mean, you know, the moral of the story here is just keep betting. Things seem to work out. The flop textures, I'm not seeing anything real dramatic. It looks pretty consistent difference between the lines here. Maybe the ace high is maybe not quite as dramatic as some of the others, but I'm splitting hairs.
Right.
The turn textures, I mean, we're seeing a much higher red bar. I mean, when there's a 10% overfold, it's going to be hard for me to get any textures right. Like, what are the odds your overfold is 10% globally, but you're getting certain textures absolutely spot on? Like, when I see an overfold that big, you almost have to look at textures. Let me see here. The four flush looks particularly bad. They're overfolding by 25% when it's a four flush turn. And even the non-four flush turn, they're overfolding by about 12-13%. So when the monotone flops stay three to the flush on the turn, they overfold. And when you get the fourth to the suit, they do that too. I mean, it's, you know, I could sit here and quibble over all these, but the bottom line is they're overfolding regardless of texture and looks like pretty damn dramatically.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're gonna have me just bet.
Yeah, really. I mean, already we're doing pretty good with it from what I could tell. I mean, your aggression frequencies were good, your win rate was good, but I mean, there may be even more out there to pick up from what I'm seeing. Like this
There
is,
is.
I'm jealous of this player pool, and you know, and I'm speaking as someone with access to Bovada for God's sakes. You know? Let's see here. How you're doing on the turn? You're
Right.
overfolding the turn by about 8%. We'll take a look and see if the pool is maybe betting too frequently or too infrequently or too strong or something like that. You're getting those turn raises in there though again too. So yeah, that's a spot where I'm particularly weak about getting my turn raises in. That's a spot I've always been kind of poor at. But you've got no such issue there. You're over raising by a couple percent. You are overfolding, but not nearly as dramatic as the regs, although 8% still is decently large.
That's still pretty high.
Yeah. I think I said I thought that you were overfolding an earlier street, you know, and so you don't have to fold the river as well. So that part of it could be, you know, tying into a comprehensive full street strategy. Although I'm willing to bet this is probably something you could reduce a bit more. I mean, we'll take a look at how often they're bet folding too, and see if maybe you can just turn some of those folds into raises for the hell of it.
Yeah.
Positionally doesn't seem too dramatic. It looks like middle position up there at almost 50. That one seems to stick out as a bit higher than the others, probably a bit fluky because under the gun is back more in line with some of the other stuff. And then your overfold seems to show up on the turn regardless of flop texture.
Yes.
And regardless of turn texture. So this is probably a global, it's not a case where you're just misplaying certain boards or folding too much on certain boards. It looks like a pretty universal thing. Let's go ahead. See here. I mean, something to keep an eye on. Like I said, overall your results are good. I don't want you to start making drastic changes to a winning game based on what I'm telling you, but at least giving you some spots to look into when you're
Definitely.
looking
And so,
for
like I said, if I
upgrades.
can turn some of those folds into just check raises,
Yeah.
then I'll just start check raising turns like a madman.
Yeah, why not? You know, if it's profitable, who cares, you know? See how let's look at the other side of that. Let's look at the betting.
But like also like if the regs are under betting turns, then we should be folding more.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get a feel for here to see if maybe there's a good reason for what you're doing. Now their betting frequency is 33 versus about 36, so they're missing a little bit of the bets. Their sizing, they're not using that small bet nearly as much as the bots were. The bots don't really use half pot. I mean, not never. It's an option in at least some lines, but they weren't using it very much. The regs find that a bit more. And their sizing scheme otherwise is pretty good. The regs seem to actually do pretty decent with their choice of sizing, which was kind of surprising to me. I thought that's something the players would screw up quite a bit. Other than maybe more half pot than bots and less small bet than bots, they seem to get their mix of sizings pretty decent. Let's see here. Looking at their betting frequencies by position, 33-7. Other than they're a little bit more aggressive in the blind on blind spots on the turn, it looks not very positionally influenced. Let's take a look at textures. Start with the flop. Okay, how often they're betting? I mean, they're under betting based on what the flop textures are, and it looks pretty universal. Like those all look like slight under bets, but I don't see any that's other than okay the flop that's top paired. They're not betting the turn nearly as often when the flop has the top pair that's paired, or even the bottom pair to some extent. So I guess the paired flops they're not finding turn bets nearly as often. It might be a case of where they just feel like the betting needs to be polarized, like you're betting good trips or bluff draw type hands and not much else. That might be they're just not betting some of the mergy hands. Would be my first guess at that. And then their turn textures. Let's see. The 4 straight turns, they're not betting nearly as much. The pretty good on there's a straight possible on the flop, but doesn't make a 4 straight. They're not betting the 4 flush turns all that much either. So it looks like the 4 liner turns, when you go from 3 to 4 to either the flush or the straight, that's the spot where they're betting less, and their betting range will probably be stronger, would be my guess. We'll look at that in a minute. The monotone flops that stay 3 to the flush that don't have a 4 flush turn, it looks like they're betting those a little bit more frequent than the bots were. The flush draw flops that close, they're not betting as aggressively, but the non-flush closing flush draw flops that don't close on the turn, that one's pretty close. Turns that put a backdoor flush draw out there, they're betting decently frequently, whereas the turns that stay rainbow, they're missing their bets on. Probably not real useful information, but there's a few spots relating to, straightness and flushness that they seem to deviate their betting frequencies on. Overcards or non-overcards, that doesn't seem to matter. They're betting too infrequently, regardless of that. Pairing turns, I mean, non-pairing or pairing, they're missing bets. Non-double pairing, the double pairing turns, they're definitely checking a ton, which I guess that makes sense. Again, I mean, I check those a lot too. Or the ones where they're paired and you make trips. So if you've got paired flops that pair up again on the turn, they're missing bets. Although we saw that regardless of what was going on, just the fact that the flops were paired, they were also missing bets on the turn.
Yeah, right. So slight underbetting, but not so much that I should be overfolding that much.
Yeah, probably. And who knows? You can probably still take advantage of stuff on the river too. So hanging around to pick up bullying pots on guys later is not a bad strategy and a time-honored tradition. Let's take a look at what we can see about their showdown strength and turn betting lines. When they get the showdown after betting the turn, they win slightly more often than the bots do by about 2%. Their betting range, it's the same thing we just looked at right here. Yeah. Again, about 2% more frequently win. When they check, they win a little bit less than the regs. So their checking line is going to have a little bit less strong hands that can't get the showdown to win quite as often when they check the turn. Small bet size looks very close as far as range strength compared to the bots. The medium bet size, big bet size, and over bets look to be a little bit more value heavy. So I'm guessing this was something that kind of developed just sort of subconsciously, intuitively, like a sort of subconscious pattern recognition where you realize that some of these turn bets, especially larger sizes, tend to have a bit more strength in them, and that's part of why you're overfolding the turn. I'm betting you can narrow that somewhat, but there is some rationale behind what you're doing, especially as the sizes get bigger. Their betting range tends to win at showdown just a bit more often. And then when they do bet the turn, it doesn't seem to be, positionally influenced by how strong they are. So, yeah, I think you should fold the turn less often than you do, but there is some rationale for why you're doing it because their turn bets tend to be a little bit stronger than they should be. So, some reasonable information there. Take a look at what the fish are doing on the turn.
Yeah, maybe like one more category or something, but because I gotta maybe somewhere at 345.
Okay, yeah, we'll take a look at the turn, and we can go over other stuff after we cut the recording off, or when you got more time, look at some more specific lines or stuff that you don't want to be quite as public here.
Yeah, absolutely. Love
The
that.
fish are doing. They are betting a little bit more often than theory by about 3% on the turn. More half pot, less small bet. Their sizings are oscillating a bit compared to the regs, but not too bad of a choice. Their blind on blind is where you see a big deviation in their bet frequencies. They're betting a lot more in those blind on blind spots.
Yeah, that's 0.2 for blind versus blind, where they just keep going.
They were doing on the flop and on the turn as well. Right. So I mean, it's the widest spot they've got, and they've got hands that can't win, so they just start betting. Taking a look here, doesn't seem too positionally influenced by the flop. Turn, let's see, they're betting a bit more so on those non-four flush turns. So the monotone flops that don't have a fourth to the flush on the turn, they seem to bet a lot. It's less dramatic when the four flush actually comes in. And then same idea with straights. When you don't get a four-liner to the straight on the turn, when the straight was possible on the flop, they are betting a bit more on the turn, but not too heavily influenced positionally. Not non-overcards, they're betting more. Ace overcards, they're betting slightly more. The Broadway overcards, they're betting about correctly. Take a look at their showdown strength.
Yes, you can even jump into range comp too. So it's even for regs, you can jump into their turn range comp. Is that what I understand?
Yeah, because these don't have exposed hole cards, I can't go to the range comp or range split tabs and get meaningful data because it's going to be too noisy. These two really only work if you have Bovada hands where you have the whole pool's cards, or you're looking specifically at your own hands where you have exposed hole cards. So the showdown strength is a heuristic, or a kind of like a hack around for. I don't know their range comp, but I do know how often they win at showdown when they take these lines, which is a reasonable estimate of range strength, in my mind at least. Their range strength when they bet the turn is about on par with bots, but when they check the turn, it's much weaker. They win at showdown 6% less. The small bet, they win a good bit less than what the small bet on the turn means that range is weaker. They're winning at showdown after using a small turn bet less often than the bots are. Medium bet is slightly weak, but pretty close. And then as the bets get bigger or to be over bets, the ranges get stronger. Not much going on positionally speaking there as well. So similar to what the regs are doing is that the bigger the turn bet, the more strength it tends to connote. And then, the fish in general, they're betting too much on the turn, especially blind on blind, and their checking range is especially weak. So all things you'd probably expect to see. And then I guess real quick, because I think it'll put a nice bow on the turn, we'll take a look at what the regs are doing as far as bet folding.
Yeah, because this will kind of help.
Yeah, this will go a lot into what you were talking about. Looking into maybe folding the turn a bit less.
Yeah, just raising more and folding less.
Mm-hmm.
Give me what I'm looking for. Give me the gold.
See here. Okay, so when they folding, looks like they're on point. Actually, they're having pretty good frequencies here against the turn raise, and then the sizing, these lines are matching up pretty close. So it may not be a case where you can get a ton of extra exploits. I mean, I would still mix in a few more. We're already doing it a lot, but if you got good blockers, I'd give it a try. Let's see here. Blind on blind, they're under folding. Their button, maybe like a button spot's a decent place to mix in more of those turn raises, like maybe you're check raising the turn out of your big blind versus a button RFI a bit more often. That might be one spot to work on it. Turn textures, ace overcard, looks like we're seeing some overfolds. The Broadway overcards,
this is what I would do.
Rainbow turns.
I would just take a couple of textures and look to just exploit based on those textures.
Yeah, I would do it more specifically button versus big blind. I do it more specifically on turn overcards, either Broadways or ace overcards. Rainbow boards, turns that complete the rainbow. That seems like another decent one. They're overfolding the flush closes to check raise a lot, so you've got a good blocker. That might not be a bad place to try it.
Yeah, for sure.
And then the non-four straight. So when a straight was possible in the flop and the four-liner didn't come in, that's pretty minor one right there, though. But I think specifically the the rainbow completing turns and the overcard turns look good places to attack the regs in your pool right there.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good find.
Yeah. And I know you're short on time, so we'll cut it here. But if you want to look at some more of this stuff in detail with me later, or even on your own, I would go ahead and do the same thing for any formation, any flop, any turn. Look at the rivers to see how players are playing the river, because you can often find a lot of interesting stuff there. And then if you want to go in and start diving into specific formations, specific lines, you've got all the options right here. So
Yeah,
I like to start top down and drill down in more detail, and you can start finding some more specific hidden exploits if you look in the data more close.
I would love to do that.
Yeah. Well, you've got login access. You can do it on your own, or you can talk with me later on if you got more time too.
Yeah, man. If you got the time, I got the time.
Sounds good. Well, you have a nice day. It was nice talking to you, and we'll talk a bit more in the future. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you for your time and all the hard work that you put into this. I really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, you're most welcome. Take care.
Take care, Charlie.
Bye.
Talk soon.